We're here with Khoi Vinh, the CEO and founder of Mixel, a social collaging app for iPad, but he also helped curate Art of Apps in this beautiful gallery here. He's also worked as a designer on the NewYorkTimes.com. He blogs at Subtraction.com, very influential. So what exactly are we doing here, and what threads do you see between the 7 apps that you picked to display here?
We really try to gather some of the most interesting user interface designs going on iPhone and on iPad. And I think the common thread is that everybody's still figuring it out. It's a really young platform. If you go back to the beginning of the iPhone, it's 5 years, but the iPad is certainly only about 2 years old or so. So people are really trying to figure out what makes sense for all the really different kinds of creative uses that they're putting these multi-touch devices to.
And when you look at the size of the iPad screen, do you feel like app developers are taking advantage of it? Because I feel like the Apple model is kind of like, well, the menu bar is going to be the exact same size no matter how big the screen is, and I don't really feel like that works. Like, do you see a lot of guys taking advantage of the screen size, or just maybe inflating the iPhone UI?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, Mixel is on iPad only, and in some ways, I guess the question isn't really are we taking advantage of it, is do we know what to do with all of the space? Because it's, compared to iPhone, it's a lot of space, and the way that you create a user interface for the iPad is very, very different from both the phone and from the web. I think on the web there's a compulsion to sort of cram as much as you can in there, but iPad is just this middle ground where you really want to put as little as you can in there, and yet you have a lot more space than you do on the phone. So it's just a very, very strange thing. I think in a lot of ways the iPad is still evolving. It's in this awkward teenager phase where people don't really know yet how it's going to turn out. And you really see that in a lot of apps.
How do you compare that to looking at the site for like the New York Times, where there's so much text? It's like those sites began before tablets even existed. How do you visualize those types of sites kind of changing to be more like paper, for example, which really doesn't, you're using your fingers to interact with it. There's not much navigation really.
Well, I think that's a really big open question. I mean, if you look at a lot of the ways publishers are tackling the phones and the tablets, they're very much still in the experimental phase. As I said, everybody's figuring it out. Phone is a little bit more straightforward because we really understand the use case of the phone in that people are on the go, they need a quick hit of whatever content they're consuming, and then it needs to be like highly optimized for speed and download and so forth. Tablet, the use cases are really evolving still. People aren't really quite sure how they're using tablets. A lot of folks will leave their tablets at home and not pick them up until 7 or 8 o'clock at night.
Right, when they're on the couch.
Yeah, and so that seems to be the predominant pattern for most people, but that's really changing as tablets enter the workforce. And I think you'll see in the next year or two people being issued tablets more and more, and then they'll have these tablets with them all day long, and how that impacts the way they want to access information and how the apps respond to that, I think, remains to be seen.
It's interesting. And another thing is all the apps here are iOS. To go
That's
back
right.
to that a little bit, why is that? Why do you think perhaps a higher quality of development is happening on iOS? Or is it just the fact that there are only a couple screen sizes and resolutions you're developing for?
I think
and
that
why
has
did
a
you
lot to
pick
do with it.
iOS apps?
Well, we picked iOS because we're most comfortable with iOS. We know, the people that we know, the companies that we know that are producing really beautiful apps, the ones that we look to, they're doing it on iOS, on phone and on tablet. And I fully believe that there are going to be some beautiful apps on Android, and there are right now. And I think we've talked about potentially doing another installment of this show, or at some point in the future, and it would be great to get Android companies in at that point. But I think right now, it's so clear to me that the interface design being done on iOS is really leading the way for all the platforms.
When you look at some of the apps around here, like Path or Pick2, or Instagram isn't here, but it's this kind of this everywhere mentality. You have the bottom navigation bar. You have this kind of fuzzy top bar with the name of the app or something like that. And then you see something like Tweetbot, which you have here.
Yeah.
What do you think is interesting about that? And what are they doing right, I guess? Because I mean, it's modern in different ways
Right.
than some of the other apps. You know, it's kind of breaking.
Well, we
breaking
really
rules.
wanted to get Mark Jardine from Tapbots to bring Tweetbot to the show because they really are sort of a very interesting, almost like argument for how Apple's UI foundation is really just the beginning, and you shouldn't take it at face value. You
Right,
should-
because they have a lot of the same visual motifs, but then there's so much for power users.
Right, and,
too.
and they've also reinvented almost every little widget in the UI toolkit, and in many cases improved upon them. So I think it's really important, especially to get that work here, to sort of show that people are improvising and are figuring out what works for their app, their features, their content, and their users.
When you look forward at the way these apps are being seen by the public, I mean, I haven't heard of any other art galleries of apps. I mean, how are apps working as kind of like a platform for designers now? I mean, it's like there are a ton of great looking Mac apps, but people are just for some reason getting really, really excited about iOS development. I mean, is it just that people are using these things a lot more, like on their phones every day?
I think
it's
that's
a
part of it.
platform for artists now. Like, how does that work?
I think that's part of it. I think it's kind of hard to.
I mean, you chose to focus your time on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
After working on some cool projects already.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to remember what phones were like before the iPhone.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were not very capable of showing really, really beautiful user interface design. And now all of a sudden you've got this beautiful screen that in many cases is got more resolution than we had on our desktops 5 years ago, and you're carrying it around with you all the time. On top of that, Apple did this terrific favor for designers in fixing the resolution, so you don't have to design, umpteen number of screen sizes and so forth. That's huge. But I think the biggest thing is, as you said, these apps are more integrated in our lives than desktop apps ever were, and it's a great opportunity to do really focused design, but also to have a great impact on people's lives, and to sort of meld with their usage patterns and just the way they think about the world. And I think that's why I think user interface design in the next decade is going to become more and more important and more interesting to people as a kind of
It's
an art
almost
form.
like a competition. People are being like, who can do the best job?
Right.
It's like paper. I mean, there are a million drawing apps on the App Store.
Yeah.
They came out of nowhere and built something that like nobody was doing.
Yeah, I think the key thing about paper is they made it look like magic. As soon as you open it up, it was like, wow, that's what a tablet can do for you. That you couldn't do with a Wacom tablet and Photoshop or something like that on a desktop. So it's really, really a huge breakthrough for them.
So we are in a gallery after all, and there are a lot of galleries where you're buying things.
Yeah.
And I think most of the apps here are free. But when you look at like putting a price on this kind of art, it's like not that many apps.
Right.
I mean, Tapbots is doing well, selling a lot of
Yeah.
products, but it's like, do you think this is a sustainable industry and to be building these mobile apps, especially free ones where
Right.
you can buy little pieces of it?
Right.
Like, how do you see that as a business that you're now in?
Are you asking me if every app is worth $1 billion? I don't know. I mean, I
You can
think.
answer that if you want to.
Yeah, I think, as the co-founder of a startup, as the CEO, we spend all of our days thinking about what is the worth of this thing that we're building. And I think what's nice about this show is you just get a chance to really admire the work. And so I'm going to punt on that on that question. I don't know how we really value these UIs for the time being. All I know is I think the work is interesting enough, it's beautiful enough, the work is interesting
Your show's
enough.
falling apart.
Yeah. The work is interesting enough, it's beautiful enough, and it's pushing enough boundaries that I think it really bears closer inspection, and that's what the show is about.
Do you think that there are going to be a lot more things like this popping up? Like, I mean, even WWDC sold out in 2 hours this year.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Are you going to be there?
My co-founder will be. I was actually out at a breakfast, so I was too late to score a ticket. Yeah.
Too late to order tickets.
Yeah.
Have you heard of any other like events like what you guys have done here?
We haven't. That's why we're so excited about this. I would hope to see a lot more of this because, a whole generation of people are focusing their energy on apps and they're doing amazing work. And I think it really deserves this kind of showcase. It really deserves people looking at it more closely and having a dialogue about it.
And I mean, you're obviously a busy guy. what part of you wanted to spend a month putting something like this together and reaching out to companies and bringing this type of work together?
You know, when you're in a startup, your head's down so often, and as a designer in a startup, you're often sort of drowned out by the business dialogue and the technology dialogue, and just to get a place where people can look at the the artfulness of the user interfaces that are being made all the time. I thought that was really valuable, and I really wanted the opportunity to let a lot of these app designers shine. So it seemed totally worthwhile, and plus the gallery space just made it really easy because it's ideal for showing digital art.
Yet there are no iPads to play with the apps here.
There is one downstairs. You can play with Mixel downstairs.
Yeah, we saw that.
Yes.
So speaking of Mixel, what do we have to look forward to for your company and your app?
So we're going to focus on the phone next. Right now, Mixel is iPad only, and we're taking a look at all of the interactions that we have on the iPad and seeing how they make sense in your hand and on the go.
Yeah, that's interesting because people see the iPad as like a creation or consumption device, whereas phone is more so communication and consumption, not as much creation.
Yeah, but I think multi-touch in general is much more conducive to creation than people really gave it credit for when it first debuted, and especially on the iPad. I think the amount of screen real estate you have on the iPad is just very, very conducive to doing like really great creative stuff. Just take a look at the stuff that people are doing on paper.
Yeah.
So for Mixel, like our journey is to figure out how to get people to lower their inhibitions about expressing themselves with pictures and art, that kind of thing. And so we've learned a lot on the iPad. We've learned a lot about what it takes for people to dabble in this kind of stuff, and we're going to apply some of those lessons to the phone next and reach an audience of people who are on the go and try to create a way of creating this kind of content that is complementary to the way people think about their phones.
How are you finding the different ways? Like, were you surprised by any of the ways people engage with Mixel? Like when you look at the users and what they're doing?
Yeah. So
because everything's social these days, but like what's surprising? What is unexpected? Because everybody's got social in their app these days.
So there are a few things that I think are really surprising. First, the tools that we built into Mixel that allow you to edit and make a collage are really quite primitive. We didn't put a ton of engineering time into letting you crop things, let you flip and duplicate things.
Right, you just got a lasso.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But people have done some really amazing, impressive, jaw-dropping work inside. Very, very sophisticated and very, very complex Mixels. The other thing that has been really gratifying as well as surprising is the community has come together really, really quickly and really they've sort of jointly decided, okay, we're going to figure out how to use this tool and support each other and get to know each other. And they really, they very often refer to themselves as a kind of family now. And they, a few of them are hitting these milestones like 100 Mixels or 500 or 1,000 Mixels. And that in itself is amazing, but what's even more amazing is the community is waiting for each person to hit that milestone, and as they get to like 495 Mixels, they start making Mixels, cheering them on, and really trying to root for each other to get there. And it's just been incredibly gratifying to see that kind of stuff.
And a lot of this stuff is cool, and people tend to like put a lot of effort into one or two creative apps that they want to do. Do you think there's time in our lives for all these apps, or do you think over time, let's say in 10 years, things are going to be distilled down to the point where, or is it really just like, everybody likes different books, everybody likes different video games, that kind of thing? So, it's an insane, people always throw around the word bubble, but like, is there time for all these apps?
Well, I think you hit on it. There's not enough time for all of the books that will be published this year or all the movies that will be released this year. But having that variety, and especially with digital media, with the web, creating these apps where people who have passions that otherwise would be unmet can go and meet other people and engage in it and get sort of encouraged to indulge those passions. I think that's incredibly valuable, and we see people make time for it. the session lengths inside Mixel are really super healthy. People come home, they sit,
You're
they have
saying
dinner.
How long they open it up for?
Yeah, they say sit down, they have dinner, sit down, maybe in front of the TV and open up Mixel, and they're in there for half hour or longer. They're incredibly engaged, and that's part of the beauty of the iPad as well. It's very, very immersive platform for creating experiences.
When you look at just in the past few months or so since Draw Something started taking off, do you think Style Eye are sticking around, or are we going to stick with fingers?
Well, don't tell the guys at 53 who make paper. I think that that it's fingers all the way. I'm going to vote for fingers, but Style Eye, there might be a market for them, and if anybody can do it, those guys can do it.
What about in terms of computers? I mean, you write, you mock things up, you sketch things out in applications. I mean, is everything going to be touch at some point, or?
I think there's always going to be a place for typing.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I got a Bluetooth keyboard for my iPad, and I can travel just with the iPad now, it's lighter, it has a longer battery life. It's a Logitech one, I think made by another company. I can't remember which one it is.
Zag and Logitech.
Yeah, it's a Zag, exactly, yeah. And that's terrific. It doesn't replace everything that I can do on my laptop, but I think in 5 or 10 years, it very, very possibly could, or if not sooner. So, I think there's, a pretty good bet that some touch properties will come to what we think of as desktops and laptops today. But I would be a fool to predict when. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Really appreciate your wisdom and expertise.
Yeah, thank you.